Welcome back to the channel. In today's video I visited this former concentration camp from the World War II period, of which is located outskirts of Krakow, which is here called Plaszow concentration camp. I had to come here and explore what is now a memorial park that is dedicated of the many Jewish prisoners that were stationed here at the time. It was a forced labour camp that was built from 1942 under the authority of the SS and police leaders from Krakow. The camp became enlarged over time, reaching its peak by 1944, which eventually soon became a concentration camp. There was a separated area for camp personnel, work facilities, male prisoners, female prisoners, and a further subdivision between Jews and non-Jews. Here you will see what's left of the ruins of a former Jewish funeral home that was similar to a mortuary of burying the dead for their own practice of religious rituals. This building was partly blown up during the build of the camp, and soon after the war ended it was soon demolished altogether. There were 3 mass graves all scattered around the camp. Even though the camp was meant to be a labour and concentration camp, there were still vital killings throughout its history of time period. Plaszow camp became particularly infamous for both the individual and the mass shootings carried out at Oskar Goeth, a large hill close to the camp commonly used for executions. Some 8,000 deaths took place outside the camp's fences, with prisoners trucked in 3 to 4 times weekly. The condemned were walked into a trench off the Oskar Goeth hillside, ordered to strip down and stand naked, and they were finally shot. Their bodies were then covered with dirt, layer upon layer. During these mass shootings, all other inmates were forced to watch. I made sure I respected these graves, that I didn't want to disturb its surroundings. Here is one of the 2 of the former Jewish cemeteries that you see here, has its headstones removed. The Nazis destroyed or have also cut off the blocks that were attached and laid them on the floor where the Jewish prisoners would walk on them from the main entrance leading up to the roll call point. This shows how degrading the Nazis would become over the years of its existence. I'm heading up to the hill now, and on the left side of where I'm looking at is the roll call ground, where all prisoners must attend during the shifts, mostly mornings and evenings, as well as also other events was taking place. This was an extreme labour camp that were forced labourers to several armament factories and to a stone quarry. Most of the prisoners were Polish Jews. There were also high numbers of women and children compared with the other camps. Many of the prisoners died of typhus, starvation and from executions. Because the work facilities were designed for men, the women had a lower chance of survival. I'm going to briefly explain on how Amon Goeth became one of the most evil commanders of SS that would take command of this camp. Goeth earned himself the high-ranking official ever since he was 17, going through the ranks such as a platoon leader, a squad leader, a staff sergeant in early 1941, also a Wehrmacht rank of an underfield sergeant. This got the attention of the higher officials from the Nazi Party, especially when he also was an administration role in the RKFDV, that he would earn a huge reputation and gain of the efforts to isolate, relocate and kill the Jewish population of Europe. Goeth was assigned to the SS Totenkopfbande Death's Head Unit concentration camp service. His very first assignment was to build a 200-acre concentration camp just outside Krakow, which would become here in Plaszow on 11th February 1943. By 13th March on the same year, Goeth ordered to clear and liquidate the Jewish ghetto in Krakow, of which how many lives that are not fit to work would be sent to death camps around Poland, in which most cases sent to Auschwitz. As well duties of the Plaszow camp, he eventually had ordered to destroy the Tarnow ghetto, of which had 25,000 Jews at the start of the war, but this would narrow down to 10,000 would be slave labour, while only a sum of 8,000 remained in the city. The final roundup occurred on 1st September 1943. Goeth was also the officer in charge of the liquidation of Zedna concentration camp, which interned 4,000 Jewish and 1,500 Polish slave labourers. He was sent to assist Camp Commandant SS Hauptsturmführer Hans Kellermann with mass killings. Between 23rd September 1943 and 3rd February 1944, the camp was gradually liquidated. In early May 1944, Goeth was informed that 10,000 Hungarian Jews would soon be sent to be imprisoned in Plaszow. To create space for the new arrivals, on 14th May, Goeth ordered all children in the camp to be moved to the kindergarten. The next day, Goeth had the majority of them, with only a few exceptions, sent to Auschwitz to be killed. The camp housed about 2,000 inmates when it opened. As it hit its peak of operations in 1944, a staff of 636 guards oversaw 25,000 permanent inmates, and an additional 150,000 people passed through the camp in its role as a transit camp. The survivors of the camp described Goeth as a huge imposing figure, of which he would directly kill prisoners in numerous ways, such as shooting on the spot if the prisoner was resting or slowly moving, brutal beatings of prisoners, shooting prisoners if things didn't go his way. Even made his dogs trained up for the kill of prisoners, and also any attempt of thievery in a camp, that whoever was caught, other prisoners would be punished, as well, just to name a fair few certain methods from him. On 13th September 1944, Goeth was relieved from his duties as camp commander and charged with his crimes during his reign as an SS official. This included theft of Jewish property, failure to give food to prisoners, violation of camp's regulations, unauthorized to camp's personal records, just to name some here. The camp was dismantled in January 1945 before the Soviets arrived. Goeth would become a prisoner himself in time, with charges and in court hearings being dropped around May 1945. He was sentenced to a mental illness institution by the SS, but eventually was arrested while wearing a uniform and being testified by former prisoners of Plaszow camp that he was one and only commandant of the camp. This would result later in the death of him in 13th September 1946 at Montchalupin prison in Krakow, not far from the site of Plaszow camp. His remains were cremated and the ashes thrown in the Vistula River. I'm now going to turn my attention to a man called Oskar Schindler, who would become the most valuable asset towards the Jewish community for years. I will be briefly explaining on how he managed to save hundreds of lives. Oskar Schindler at the time was a German industrialist which had numerous of ideas and roles in his business career. This soon proceeded towards being a member of the Nazi Germany from 1936, which the state gave him the coordinated of his workforces across the empire. Before the beginning of the German occupation of Czechoslovakia in 1938, he collected information on railways and troop movements for the German government. He was arrested for espionage by the Czechoslovakian government, but was released under the terms of the Munich Agreement that year. He joined the Nazi Party in 1939. The same year, Schindler would acquire the factory building in Krakow that would soon produce high metal products like of the pots and pans with many other utensils. At its peak in 1944 would see around 1,750 workers, of whom about over 1,000 were Jewish, that would save due to his Abwehr connections, helped him protect these Jewish workers from deportation and death in the Nazi concentration camps. As the time went on, he would have to bribe the high SS officials of the Nazis to inform and keep the workers in safe hands. Goeth's plan was that all factories, including Schindler's, should be moved inside the camp gate, but with a combination of diplomacy, flattery and bribery, Schindler not only prevented his factory from being moved, but convinced Goeth to allow him to build, at Schindler's own expense, a sub-camp at Amelia to house his workers and 450 Jews from other nearby factories. This would also keep the prisoners safe and have warmth and fed to keep their bellies full without any hesitation from the Nazis. Schindler was arrested twice on suspicion of black market activities and once for breaking the Nuremberg laws by kissing a Jewish girl on his birthday on 20th April 1943, an action forbidden by the Race and Resettlement Act. By July 1944, Germany was losing the war, and in this resulted most of the concentration camps were being completely dismantled and destroyed. Schindler had to convince Amon Goeth to send all of his workers, which were most of them were Jewish, to be sent to his other factory in Brunelitz. This would result in sparing certain death away from Auschwitz. Using names provided by Jewish ghetto police officer Marcel Goldberg, Goeth's secretary Mitek Pemper complied and typed the list of the 1,200 Jews who travelled to Brunelitz in October 1944. Schindler continued to bribe SS officials to prevent his workers' execution until the end of World War II in Europe in May 1945, by which time he had spent his entire fortune on bribes and black market purchases of supplies for his workers. In the film Schindler's List, the actor Liam Neeson, who played Oskar at the end of the last scene, shows him wanting and could have saved many more Jewish people, well within in the thousands more, perhaps. This subjected him being slightly greedy, having owned an expensive vehicle and other clothing garments, cause of how powerful he was as a businessman status. In 1949, Schindler immigrated to Argentina, where he tried to raise chickens and then neuter a small animal raised for its fur. When the business went bankrupt in 1958, he left his wife and returned to Germany, where he had a series of unsuccessful business ventures, including a cement factory. Schindler received awards for his efforts during the war, including the German Order of Merit in 1966. Schindler died of liver failure on 9th October 1974. He is buried in Jerusalem on Mount Zion, possibly the only member of the Nazi Party to be honored in this way. This is the memorial victim statue that was placed here in 1964 to honor the tragic circumstances outcome of the Jewish communities during the World War II. Here is the infamous grey house of where Amon Goeth was stationed as the camp commandant, and where he looked out of the balcony to begin his shootings of random prisoners. It was one of many acts of his crimes for killings. I'm still amazed how this structural building wasn't destroyed by the authorities, but I guess it's to show us a symbol of what destruction of war equivalents to. Coming up to the view of how the camp would look like at its full capacity. Thank you for watching the video. It was a total shock of visiting this memorial place of which many prisoners were brutally punished in many ways. Please consider liking and subscribing to the channel, and stay tuned for another adventure in the near future.